Those guidelines let transgender students use whichever bathroom they wanted, whichever one correlated with their gender identity. Well, not anymore. The president now saying state and local officials and parents should be making that decision, not the federal government. This is a case that is headed to the Supreme Court. Let's go to the White House where we find our Joe Johnson. Joe, what's interesting about this, other than just the fact that we've had a reversal here from the Obama administration, is the divide within the Oval Office and the president's cabinet, right? You had Education Secretary Betsy DeVos opposed to the administration doing this. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said this is what we should do, and he won out.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Poppy. The president's new education secretary, Betsy DeVos, sources telling CNN, and she was opposed to this, but apparently eventually went along with it, or at the very least was overruled. Now, we do have part of a statement that came out from her just last night. It said, "We have a responsibility to protect every student in America and ensure that they have the freedom to learn and thrive in a safe and trusted environment," also adding this is not merely a federal mandate, but a moral obligation no individual school district or state can abdicate. And there was more pushback last night from the recording artist, Jackie Ivanko, whose older sister came out as transgender just a couple years ago. Ivanko tweeting, "You gave me the honor to sing at your inauguration. Please give me and my sis the honor to meet with you to talk transgender rights." We heard from her last night as well. Let's listen.
When I heard the news, I was kind of just thinking about my sister and the things that she's gone through and the struggles that we've all had to deal with, and me watching her suffer like that is really hard to do.
In order to make a huge decision like that, you need people who live it every day. So I feel like it was a little rushed, and I feel like there wasn't a lot of planning that went into it.
Now, the guidance on transgender issues is far from a settled issue. As you said at the top, Poppy, there is definitely a case that is headed to the United States Supreme Court. Now, this Trump administration weighing in on this issue comes at a time when President Trump could use a little help in his approval ratings. The latest Quinnipiac poll indicating 38% of respondents approve how President Trump is doing, with 55% registering disapproval. Poppy.
Joe Johnson, the White House, thank you very much. We've got a lot to talk about with our panel. Joining me now is Charmaine Yost. She worked in the Reagan administration. She also served as the senior advisor to Huckabee's 2008 presidential campaign. She's now a senior fellow at American Values. David Swerdlook is a CNN. Hi, good to have you. CNN political commentator and assistant editor at the Washington Post, and Patrick Keeley of the New York Times joins us. He's also a CNN political analyst. Nice to have you all. And Charmaine, let me begin with you. I was reading a little bit about what you've said about this move by the White House, and you say, look, this is consistent, you believe, with the president and where he has always stood and what he said on the campaign trail. But a lot of people are remembering this moment.
There have been very few complaints the way it is. People go, they use the bathroom that they feel is appropriate. There has been so little trouble. I would say that's probably the best way. Do you have any transgender people working in your organization? I don't know. No? I really don't know. I probably do. I really don't know.
So if Caitlyn Jenner were to walk into Trump Tower and want to use the bathroom, you would be fine with her using any bathroom she chooses?
That is correct.
So, Charmaine, how do you square the two?
Well, I think he is doing, in terms of the policy that he laid out on the campaign trail, exactly what he said he would do, turning it back to the states. And look, Poppy, teenagers have all kinds of problems, particularly in 2017 America. It's a tough time to be a teenager. We need to be empowering local school boards to do what's appropriate in their communities, not having Washington.
How does this help teenagers that are struggling? Because the ACLU said this is, the antithesis of what the president ran on. They called those words empty words when he promised to protect LGBTQ individuals.
Well, it's not a zero-sum game here. Betsy DeVos tweeted out last night that the Department of Education is deeply committed to compassion for all students. You don't want federal bureaucrats dictating policy to local school boards. And frankly, Poppy, as a woman, I'm concerned that one of the more important voices that has come out in this whole debate are sexual abuse survivors. We have to ensure that we maintain safe spaces for young women and girls in locker rooms, in bathrooms, and that there
Absolutely,
is
but
that
can you
those women
Charmaine,
are also
since you bring that up, absolutely. But since you bring that up, can you point to one incident where a transgender individual has inflicted harm on the people you're talking about?
The real issue is the opening that it provides for sexual predators. This makes it much more difficult for law enforcement agencies to identify people who might be using this as a way to get access to young girls and women. And frankly, Poppy, I would challenge people to look it up. There are multiple examples of people doing this. So it's something that should be a real concern.
I mean, you can't. You
Yes,
need to back
absolutely.
up that assertion
Absolutely.
with facts on this program.
Oh, well, look, I can give you multiple examples, and and it's documented very well on the internet, so you can see law enforcement being concerned about the fact that this makes it harder for them. Okay. We're not talking about, it's really all about people using this as an opportunity to say, hey, the law has changed. I now have access to these girls in a bathroom.
I wish you would provide those sources for what you're talking about on the internet.
Absolutely
you can send those to us. But David, to you, civil rights. Thank you. Civil rights groups, including the Southern Poverty Law Center, have come out with this statement. The administration has contributed to the baseless hysteria and panic that puts so many vulnerable transgender youth at risk. When you look at the FBI statistics, in 2015, 118 transgender hate crimes were committed. How do you believe the Trump administration can answer to its critics on this one before this is all hashed out at the Supreme Court level?
Yeah, Poppy, I'd put three questions to the Trump administration and to Charmaine there. One, on the politics, as you pointed out, President Trump campaigned and said several times that he was going to be a great friend, or words to that effect, to the LGBT community, yet he's kind of prioritized this move in the early days of his administration. Second thing is that if Republicans are characterizing this as a states' rights issue, will they be consistent on states' rights as we go forward on other issues? For instance, will they take the states' rights posture if states with states that have, laws that legalize marijuana? What will Attorney General Sessions' view be on those laws? And then lastly, I would say, yes, as Charmaine brought up, sexual assault victims and survivors have to have a voice in this discussion, but that's the challenge here, right? It has to be balanced against the voice of transgender individuals who do face, especially youth, disproportionate, violence and bullying, et cetera, in schools.
I do want you guys to weigh in also on the big story that we keep seeing play out day after day here, and that is the outcry at a lot of these town halls this week. Patrick, to you, here's what one of the co-founders of Indivisible had to say. This is a movement that bills itself, just to be very transparent here, as a progressive movement that encourages anti-Trump activists to organize locally. Here's how they put it.
We've seen this playbook before. When the Tea Party first started popping up in 2009, Democrats said, oh, they're AstroTurf. They said, they're being funded by the Koch brothers. We don't have to listen to them. We don't have to take their concerns seriously because they're not, representative. And that did not work out well for them. So if I were a Republican member of Congress and I was seeing massive concern from my own constituents, I would recommend that they take that seriously.
Is she right, Patrick? Because Congressman Sanford on my program yesterday, who had a lot of that outcry at his town hall, said I learned more from the dissenters than the people that agree with me.
Right. I mean, the protesters, I think, on the progressive side are definitely taking a page from the success that the Tea Party protesters, conservative protesters, had for years. These aren't necessarily people who are professional protesters, Poppy, but they've learned professional tactics for how to protest. They know that right now there is a sense of sort of disorganization or maybe even chaos from some point of view in the Trump administration. There are a lot of different issues kind of going down the tracks in terms of Obamacare, in terms of Russia, in terms of the wall, in terms of tax reform. And these protesters know that the way to really get their voices heard is to make good television, is to sort of take advantage of a moment when there is a lot of kind of uncertainty and instability, it seems like, in Washington, and do things like having a 7-year-old, making comments that the kid made on television. That makes great television. That's galvanizing. It's very hard for Sean Spicer at the podium in the White House to get into a fight with a 7-year-old.
You bring up a good point, Charmaine. You saw that at the top of the program, that 7-year-old, so we don't need to replay it. But, I mean, kids can't vote, but they can certainly get people talking, right? How do you think the administration can best handle things like that? How should Spicer address it when he's asked about it, no doubt, today in the presser?
Well, I think we need to stay focused on the fact that, of course, there's some legitimate concerns out there with people. That's what you're supposed to do at town halls. Come out. That's the best of American politics. But let's not miss the fact that you have Michael Moore out there tweeting out, putting lists of town halls, hashtag resistance. You have pre-printed signs, pre-canned chants. I noticed that in your package, all across the country, some of the exact same signs and chants going on. So there is definitely an element of gasoline being poured on a fire, and there's also
does that make it less legitimate? Does it make it less?
Some of it is. I mean, some of this is a relitigation of the election. Some of this is just a continuation of irresponsible kinds of rhetoric.
This is a relitigation of the election in the same way it was a relitigation of the 2008 election when the Tea Party came out and protested President Obama. People had a right to protest then. They had a right to protest now. I'm not sure what Charmaine is driving at.
Nobody's saying that they don't have a right. The question is the intensity, the level of vitriol, hostility, and hatred that's being expressed. Frankly, here's something that, if I can just finish really quickly, I mean, you haven't seen a situation like we have now where a former president, within the first month of an election, is coming out and criticizing his successor. I mean, we're in really uncharted territory here in terms of decorum and the kinds of things that we expect in American democracy of moving forward and uniting.
Really quickly, guys, I want to get your reaction to some new polls, new Quinnipiac polls coming out about the president and his performance. Let's pull this one up about truth and who people trust most. When it comes to who voters trust most overall, the news or the president, 52% trust the news more than the president, but there's this big divide. So many more Republicans trust the president than the news, and vice versa when you look at Democrats. Patrick, what do you make of these numbers?
Yeah, no, I think it's, it goes to the divide very much in this country, and I think a lot of the energy that you're seeing out there, I think Republicans still feel the need right now to very much stand behind President Trump because they see him, a bit on the ropes in terms of asking the question, how is he going to build coalitions, certainly with the other side, to try to get any kind of legislation passed, or is it just going to be kind of a Republican, sort of bloc that's trying to move things? And I think the one concern I would say in terms of just on the left in terms of these protest movements is if, in 2009 with the Obamacare town hall, movement, there was a lot of focus on the right against Obamacare. It was a very focused protest. Right now you're seeing a very diffuse protest, and you're seeing, like in the polling numbers, a real sort of divide and conflict in terms of, who trusts whom and what institutions really have influence right now. So I don't think, at least right now, it seems like this, these movements aren't quite as sort of focused and strong. And for a lot of Republicans who look at the news media and who don't sort of trust us or see that these, that these videos aren't from, sometimes they think, really authentic, that it's professional protesters, that's a problem.
I got to leave it there. Dying on time. It's nice to have you all on. Heated debate.
Thanks,
we
Poppy.
appreciate it. Charmaine, David, and Patrick, thank you. Still to come for us, a major test for the United States and Mexico's relationship today. This